Question 3. You got a lot of this. How do you come up with level objectives? Or how do I come up with level objectives? How do I, make fun things for players to do in my game spaces? My technique, my process, I would always start with what I'd like to call my list of memorable moments. What I do in my process is I am assembling all the time as I'm working on a level, a collection of memorable moments, bits that would make a level exciting, interesting, and memorable for the player. For example, these would stick out in your mind. Like, oh my gosh, that's the place where the guy got gored in the thigh by the bull. Or, oh no, there's the lady whose car fell into the marina or whatever. Those are the kinds of moments that will stick in a player's mind. That's what you're looking for. Those moments that will really stick out for the player and go, oh my gosh, I really remember that quite clearly. And they can be horrible, like a man getting gored in the ghoulies by a bull, or they could be funny, like a lady's car, whatever, getting stuck on that boat. Or anywhere in between. They can be, they can be sad, they can be happy, they can be funny, they can be horrible. There are a few things that go onto that list. One would be dramatic context for the action. And this is a complex topic, but when I'm thinking about levels, especially when I'm thinking about story in levels, I don't like to think about story, because to me, story suggests a static experience. It's if you just talk about the story, it's kind of like, I am the designer and I want to tell you something. I want you to just consume this story that I'm telling you. But I personally think that it's a lot more powerful as a narrative technique if instead what I'm doing is I'm creating dramatic context for your decisions as a player. So imagine that, there's a nuclear reactor that's going to melt down and destroy Las Vegas, Nevada. Immediately, you start thinking about, okay, that gives you dramatic context. Las Vegas is a peaceful place. It's filled with unusual sights and sounds, and it's in danger. So immediately, it's creating a dramatic context for your actions as the player to go and save Las Vegas, Nevada. You've got to, find your way through the crazy, all the casinos and maybe down the strip, and eventually find this, experimental nuclear reactor and somehow figure out a way to shut it down. As a level designer, that gives me a palette that then I can use to create moments for you, the player, to live through, rather than me saying, here's how you save Las Vegas. Or you've got to escape from the planet of mad cows by, reassembling your reentry pod, which is this crazy picture that I found on the right on the internet. You've got to escape from the mad cow planet. And so finding the pieces of the pod, assembling them, avoiding the mad cows themselves, all those become dramatic context for your actions as a player. So you're going to set up the objectives for the player, like, oh, you're going to have to do these things to be able to move the story forward. Okay. But in addition to, all right, so you've got, let me just go backward for a second. We want to make a list of memorable moments. We include dramatic context. Another great source for content that can go on your list of memorable moments is what I like to call narrative elements. Discoverable story, opt-in story, and cutscene. Think of these are tools in your toolbox as a designer for how you're going to actually tell the, whatever the story is that you're trying to develop in your level. Discoverable story is bits of story that the player can find as they are going through your level. So imagine it's, little computer consoles that are sprinkled throughout your game, and the player can choose to log in and get bits of data, or it's the video, the recorded video or audio segments of tape that the player can find that are going to help fill in details of the backstory, that type of thing. That's discoverable. That's discoverable story. And where you want to include those goes on your list of memorable moments. So you can put discoverable story like, oh, I want them to find this console here that's going to talk about how the mad cows took over the planet, or I want them to find the data recorder over here that shows where the critical pieces for the escape pod fell to down onto the planet's surface, so that they know where they have to go to recover those bits, off of Mad Cow Planet. So that's discoverable story. Opt-in story is, think of it like I don't know, sub-quests or side quests in an RPG. As you're going through the main storyline of the game, or you're going through the main content, you may be able to put along the player's path these things where, the poor, helpless, huddling people on the Mad Cow Planet say, "Please, sir, can you help us? The cows have taken all of our food and we need, grain. And if you can just please secure some grain for us, then we will be able to live through the next winter." You don't have to save the grain from the for the Mad Cow peasants if you don't want to. It's opt-in. You can choose to do it. And if you do, then there's some benefits that are associated with that, but you don't have to. But the point that I'm making is that it goes back onto your list of memorable moments. So you're thinking about, okay, am I going to have discoverable story? Am I going to have opt-in story? And where does that fall as you're thinking about how you're going to populate your level? And then finally, of course, there's the idea of cutscenes. So as you're thinking about your space, you want to make sure that you're accounting for where dramatic cutscenes can happen in the course of the gameplay. So you think about, all right, I don't know. Let's imagine for a second that your pod crashes on the Mad Cow Planet, and you're stumbling your way across the wasteland, and you're having a hard time, and then you stop, and there's a cool cutscene of another pod, and you're barely in radio contact, and it comes streaking down out of the atmosphere, and it manages to crash land, but all the occupants are killed. That becomes the pod that you're going to use to escape. Watching that cutscene of where that pod is coming down from the sky, you need to plan for that space. You need to make sure that that's included in your list of memorable moments on your level. So think about memorable moments that you'd like for the player to experience as you're thinking about your level population. Think about how you're going to build dramatic context for their actions as a player. And also think about how you want to introduce narrative elements into the level design, into your level, that are going to help you tell the game story overall. That's a really good way to go about approaching the encounters in your levels. Okay, I feel like that was a very complicated answer. Hopefully it makes some sense as we review it in that way. Question 4. Oh my goodness. What pace should I introduce new elements in my level or in my game? For me, the answer is that a project needs to determine what I like to call its content strategy. Let me just give you a quick example here. Content strategy, put simply, is, as a project, how you intend to introduce new bits of content to your player. Here's an example number 1. One content strategy is the author approach. This is what we used on Halo 1 and Halo 2. In those games, there was nobody sitting over our shoulder as we were working on designing those encounters and saying, you have to use these bad guys, or you have to use these guns, or you have to build the content in this particular way or that particular way. We had tons of freedom to make the encounters into whatever it was that we thought we wanted, whatever we wanted to build. And so what you saw, I would argue, in those games is you see a lot of variety in terms of the experiences that you have, because it comes from the author's instincts as a designer. They say, oh, you know what I would really like to do is I'd like to, have a very sniping heavy mission in the dark where you're sneaking along, picking off the guards, and you're trying to kind of get up to the base of the Truth and Reconciliation and infiltrate by stealth. Or I want to have a level that's wide open, freewheeling tank fun where you're blasting your way across a bridge. Both of those are valid. Both of those, can fall into an author approach. And of course, the challenge when you're doing an author approach to your content strategy is figuring out how to make the experience consistent across the entire game, because it can be very streaky or peaky, if you will. Parts are much harder, other parts are not as hard, and if the player approaches them the exact same way, it doesn't really work. So there's a challenge to the author approach. There's another approach. There are several, but one other that we could talk about right now is called the formula approach to content strategy. In the formula approach, what you do is you try to create sort of a mathematical understanding, or at least a conceptual understanding of the mechanics that are in your game, and then you dole them out in a very methodical way. So you say, well, if one jump is easy, then 2 jumps is medium or moderate difficulty, 3 jumps is hard. And depending on kind of where you are in the game, that's what you want to do. Is you want to say, all right, well, I'm using easy jumping setups, medium or moderate jumping setups, or hard jumping setups, and that's the way that you are building the encounters in your level. The nice thing about a formula approach is that, for example, in this case, we're looking at a platform jumping example, but you could take all of your mechanics and kind of create this big matrix that sprinkles them all through there, and you have a very clear idea of, oh, well, this is level 1. This is world 1, level 1, so I know how hard it should be. This is world 3, level 7, I know how hard that should be, and I understand kind of how to go about building the content that's in that space. So my recommendation, as you're talking about, how do you dole out mechanics, is either one of these approaches, and there are other strategies as well, but I won't get into those here, but either one of these strategies are valid. They both can make great games. The formula approach is used very commonly by Ubisoft in their Rayman series of games. That's actually where I was first exposed to it as a codified type of thinking. And the reason that they like to do it that way is because they can build an understanding of exactly how to create a Rayman platform type title, and then they can hand that expertise off from one studio to another. Ubisoft is a global game developer, game publisher. They've got studios all over the world. So it's very useful for them to be able to say, okay, we're moving from the studio in the Swiss Alps to the studio in Hong Kong, but here's the fundamental knowledge of how you build a good Rayman level, how we make it fun. And this is how we use the mechanics. This is how we dole them out. Now, of course, the graphics in Rayman are beautiful. I mean, they all look very unique and very, kind of mysterious Rayman-y world. But in terms of the fundamental mechanics of how it's laid out, it's much more of a formula approach than an author approach. But either strategy can work great, and they can make great games. But as a team, you really need to be deliberate about how you're going to approach content strategy.